Midnight on Earth podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan. Hey everybody, we're back with another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm your host, Jake Weaver, and we're here to bring you more knowledge, more light, and more love. We have an amazing guest today. I'm super excited to have Virginia Hummel on the show. She wrote a book, Orbs and the Afterlife, and of course, Cracking the Grief Code. She's an incredible lady with an incredible story. We're going to talk about orbs. But first, I need you to do something for me. Go to Blue Cobra CBD. That's bluecobracbd.com and check out Howard Hitt, aka Big H's Blue Cobra CBD oil. It's the highest quality CBD oil that's available for purchase. I highly recommend it. It's an incredible oil that is 100% organic, and the CBD is derived from 100% organic Oregon-grown hemp. This is unlike any other CBD oil product that's available because the extraction method is a proprietary method that was developed by Big H called the Hitt extraction method. This method involves no chemicals, no solvents, no gases. There really is nothing else like it on the market. Other CBD products use fluorocarbon-based extraction, which is terrible. There are other companies out there, and there's enough CBD products now in 2021 to fill multiple grocery stores. So I did the filtering for you. I have been aware or involved with the hemp, cannabis, and CBD industry for a really long time. And you can see we've had some great cannabis-related guests on the show. And I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know about the differences between distillate and isolate and how these things are being extracted. There really is nothing else like the Hitt extraction method. When you understand that, you'll understand why this product is so special. And we have a Blue Cobra CBD Midnight on Earth discount code, and that code is MIDCBD. That's MIDCBD. And what that does is that gives you free shipping. When you go to check out, there is a discount code box that you can plug that discount code into, and you will get free shipping on any order, 1 bottle, 10 bottles, 100 bottles. And of course, every product that's sold on the bluecobracbd.com website is backed by Big H's 100% money back guarantee. So if for some reason you're dissatisfied with the product, I'm not really sure why you would be. It's kind of strange. It's outside of my realm of understanding. However, if that is the case for you, then you get all your money back, including shipping, and you can keep the product, give it to somebody else. They're going to be excited about it, and they're going to want that discount code. Unfortunately, though, that discount code does only apply to the continental 48 states. It does not apply to international orders either. So if you are an international listener and you are interested in this and you want to know more about it, of course, go to the website first. But then you can contact Howard Hitt directly via email or the telephone number provided on the website. And you can contact Howard and ask him directly, talk to him directly about these products and if your country and your country's laws correlate with what his product is. And again, this is a product that I use daily. I put it in my morning shake because you can put it in your body. Of course, you can put it on your body. It is topical. If you have muscle aches, things like that, you can apply that externally and you will receive the benefits. So please, everyone, please go check it out. bluecobracbd.com. That's bluecobracbd.com. Follow me on Instagram at midnight_on_earth. That's the address. If you go there, click the follow button. It connects us so you know what these guests are trying to get out to the world. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you go to get your podcast. Click that button that connects us so you know when the next episode is going to drop. You know whatever we're doing, you know about it instantly. And of course, the most important thing is to please tell a friend, tell someone that you know that likes these type of podcasts, that would love to know about orbs and healing through spiritually transformative experiences, which is what we're going to talk about. Tell those people you know them well. midnightonearth.com. Well, I told you about Blue Cobra CBD, and we're going to talk to Virginia in just a second. But first, as always, I have to read her bio. So here we go. Virginia Hummel is the author of 4 books on the afterlife and co-producer of an upcoming documentary on healing grief through spiritually transformative experiences, or STEs. Her deepest hope is to help guide others on a spiritual path to transmute pain, loss, and grief into personal growth and empowerment. She is a lifelong student of metaphysical, spiritual, and after-death subjects. With the death of her youngest son, Christopher, she experienced a series of spontaneous spiritual events that helped transform her grief and find a place of balance and joy. Virginia has been a researcher and experiencer of the orb phenomenon for over a decade. She is chairman of Orb Encounters at eternia.org, whose mission is to advance research, education, and applied programs concerning the physics of consciousness and the interactive relationship between consciousness and physical reality. Yeah, wow. Mind and matter. It's just amazing. She is the creator of orbwhisperer.com, a website dedicated to the research, education, and exploration of the orb phenomenon, and virginiahummel.com, dedicated to healing grief through spiritually transformative experiences, STEs. And she's here with us today. Hello, Virginia. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Jake, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm very interested in orbs. I'm also interested in healing through STEs. And turns out you put those things together. And here you are.
And here I am. Gosh, thank you. Thank you so much for thinking of me and of this topic, because most people have a hard time with it, actually.
Well, the orb phenomenon, I remember, began, it seems like, for me, it came into my consciousness in the digital camera age, where people were taking these photos with digital cameras and they were seeing these kind of anomalies that were these like light balls, and they could have been things like dust particles, like maybe some people have claimed, but in other cases, they seem to have strange organization that seemed to indicate something more than just dust particles. But really, the orb phenomenon has been around since earlier than that, as you recounted in your book. But when did this first come into your consciousness? When did you first discover orbs?
Well, my daughter growing up would always tell me she would see these little balls of light. And as a parent, you want to believe your child, but you're also a little skeptical about what's going on. And I humored her and I said, okay. And she would describe them to me. And I really didn't pay attention. You know, you're busy being a parent and doing all sorts of things. But what got my attention was 20 months after the death of my son, I got up in the middle of the night to turn off the air conditioning. And when I came back into my darkened room, there was this brilliant ball of light about the size of a ping pong ball hovering 3 feet down from the ceiling, about 3 feet out from the wall. And I saw it and I was startled, and it appeared to be startled also. It suddenly darted to my left, took a sharp left turn, like an L shape, and went about 5-6 feet and disappeared, but it left a trail of light, like you would circle a sparkler on 4th of July.
Oh.
And I'm like, what was that? Oh my gosh. there has to be a burglar outside with a flashlight, right? Your brain just can't comprehend this. So I jumped in bed and thought about it. I go, wait a minute, I have blackout shades. There's just no way any light could come in. And talked to a girlfriend the next day, and she said that was a light being. And I said, well, what's a light being? And she said, well, it can be a soul, a person, and an ET. There's just different things. She said, but the International Conference of Orbs and Light Being is being held in Palm Springs in 2 weeks. Maybe you want to go to that. So I said, you mean, I started laughing. I mean, there's actually a conference that talks about orbs and light beings? Wow.
Yeah, little did you know there was an orb convention.
I did not know that there was an orb convention. Anyway, that really kind of sent me on a journey to start researching. And then I grabbed my camera and I started taking pictures, trying to discover what was dust, what was lens flare, what was really an orb. And wow is all I can say. What an adventure it's been. Yeah,
and you've been taking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of photos at this point of orbs, right?
Yes, and infrared video, trying to gather as much information as I possibly could so I could decipher what is an orb, what isn't an orb, what's real, what looks like an orb but could be a hair on the lens or light diffraction, all sorts of different things. And it takes a while to kind of figure it out, but eventually you get there. The cool thing is the more I thought about them, the more excited I became and the more would appear.
Right.
And
I did notice that in your book. I actually read your book. For people that are listening, it's an incredible book. I read it over the last few days, and yes, that is something you talked about. It did expand for you as your consciousness and awareness of the orbs expanded. It was really fascinating.
It was fascinating. And the first time I started taking pictures, I was just getting the white or the milky white orbs. And I called my daughter. I said, there's things in my camera. What are they? She goes, well, Mom, did you get in color yet? And I said, what? They come in colors? Are you kidding me? So I ran outside, and immediately outside I got a beautiful gold one and a blue one. And I was hooked. It was absolutely incredible. And to eventually find faces in them, or take photos of someone who's talking about a loved one who has passed, and there's a big orb right next to them. I mean, it was profoundly healing for so many people to see that when they've been grieving so much. And they want some sort of validation that their family member is still present on some level. And to show them an orb picture of them right there next to them, or even with the face of their loved one in it, was very, very powerful.
Yeah, like on the cover of your book, it's actually very profound, because what it does indicate for those people is there is a survival of consciousness after death, and then that gives them the comfort. It seems like we lost that awareness as human beings. We kind of knew that we survived after death for probably thousands of years. Collectively, we believed that, but somehow through certain developments in culture and religion and politics, we lost sight of the fact that we do survive after death, and we need that validation.
It's amazing. What you just reminded me of a story. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead. No, we're having fun.
When we're talking about does consciousness survive, a lot of my research, once I got past, through orbs, was, how does consciousness survive? Is reincarnation real? Kids that start talking about their past lives, is that real, or is that something that they're making up? And there was a little boy in Golan Heights in Syria. There's a group of people that the whole, I don't want to call them a tribe, but they believe in reincarnation. So they listen to the children when they start talking. They look for birthmarks and all sorts of things on their body to try to discover who this child was in a past life. And there was a little boy who, he was about 3, said he had been murdered and he lived in another village. And so the elders got him together. They went to the next village. He showed them where his body was buried and where the axe that had
Uh-oh, I think I lost you.
him at old, who murdered him, and the murderer eventually confessed.
Oh my
So
God.
there's the most amazing stories, documented stories of reincarnation and life after death, which just kind of brings the bigger picture of heaven and earth, God and Satan.
Well, it definitely gives us a glimpse of something bigger and acknowledges something more than just our normal three-dimensional experience. It really gives us this understanding that there is something outside of our normal everyday perception of reality. So, Virginia, we know about orbs, like I said, in the mainstream because they started showing up in digital cameras. It seemed like in the beginning of the 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, 6, as the technology started to increase, the costs came down, and then everyone had a digital camera. And this is before they were common in cell phones. And they really started to explode because they were showing up in everybody's digital photos all over the world, over the world. And I can think of dozens of orb photos that I took at concerts. For instance, at a reggae concert where there was a stage and 3,000 people, and it was very spiritual music, and there was a lot of love in the air and really good energy. And we took a photo, and there were thousands of orbs of all shapes and sizes across the crowd. They've been in people's personal photos, but really they've been in photos even earlier than that. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Well, there was a photo in the botanical gardens back in around the 1900s. And someone, the cameras back there were just basically beginning, very simplistic cameras. And they caught a huge orb floating through this botanical garden, and which is really interesting. And when I look back, even in my 35 millimeter photos I had taken, or just your instant, the ones where you had to have the film developed, I've even seen orbs in those photos, but I didn't realize it at the time because I think our brain blocks out a lot of the extraneous stuff that we're just not paying attention to. And once you realize that there's orbs in photos, you can go back and look at your old photographs that you had to have printed and actually discover orbs in those photographs.
I was noticing something, though, and I wanted you to comment on this. I noticed that there was a pretty steep decline in digital orb photos as the technology developed. Probably around 2009, 10, 11, I really stopped seeing the amount of orb photos as prevalently and as widespread as they were before. Do you think that somehow they engineered the technology in such a way to stop people from capturing those orb photos?
I'm not sure that would be the answer. You might consider that maybe people just it was a phase everybody was going through. Everybody was excited about them. Now they're on to the next thing.
So because people were aware of them, they showed up more, and then they started to taper off. So people's awareness tapered off. So then they didn't show up as much.
I think that they're there. The orbs are here. They've always been here. Again, we have to put up our spiritual radar and feel them and see them and actually want to photograph them. I think just collectively, people who are interested in orbs, we all go in cycles of, we're interested in this, and then the next thing comes out and we're interested in that. It's quite possible that people lost interest and stopped taking the amount of orb photos that they did in the beginning when it was a new thing, when it was a new concept, and maybe the excitement wore off. I'm not sure that the camera manufacturers built anything in to block that out, but I could be completely wrong on that.
It seems like it does awaken people. I guess that's where my conspiracy theory mind comes into play. Because when you
I got one of those too.
yeah, so when you see, like the beautiful picture of the Buddhist monk that had the orb on his third eye, and it's so inspiring to see that, it activates you, it awakens you. So my conspiracy theory mind makes me feel like, oh well, they don't want people awakened in a general sense. They just want people consuming. So they're doing everything in their power to filter out these spiritual experiences. I guess that's where I was going with that.
I hear you, and I would not put them past it, frankly. But, God is way more powerful than anything else. And wins in the end. And I know when we authentically, from our heart space, need a miracle, or we need something that is that just awaken us, or a connection to know that we're not alone. It will happen. It does happen. And so when we stop seeking, I think we stop seeing. And I think it might not be any more complicated than that. But there's definitely people out there that are trying to suppress a lot of this connection to God and our Heavenly Father. And the power that comes with that connection.
I know.
That would be something that they would want to stifle.
Yes.
For sure.
Because it keeps people in that consumer, very limited life mindset. You unite with the Creator and you're tapping into a whole other energy field, you could say.
Absolutely. When I was about 8 or 9, my mom had taken me to Christian Science Church. And I sat there and I listened to this sermon and I was not impressed. And as I left, I can remember telling them, Jesus said we could do everything he could do and more.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, do you know the things that he did? And he's saying we could do that and more. You guys, I need to know more about this. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. And I was just like, okay, they're not the people I need to be talking to, because there's something amazing about him and what he can do and what God can do. And the fact that that Spirit and God allowed me to have a connection with my son to help me through the trauma of losing him, and the grief and the miracles and the things that went on were so awe-inspiring that in the midst of deep grief, I felt joy and comfort and peace. So there's good out there, and we just need to tune into it. However it works for you, I think that's just really important, especially in today's world and all the nonsense that's going on.
Right. And with your son, it was an indicator for you that the soul does survive, and that orbs in general, you feel like, can be physical manifestations of the soul or some sort of conscious energy. But is it always that way?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? And I would love to give you a definitive answer. But what my experience has led me to believe is that not only can our loved ones show up as orbs, we can have entities from different dimensions. We can have ETs. We can have demonic entities, I think, the gambit. And for me personally, I was very clear, very adamant, and I drew very strong boundaries about what I would let in my presence and what I wouldn't. And I think anybody that is dealing with the occult or taking orb photos, whether you're doing tarot card reading or any psychic stuff, you have to be very clear where you stand, whose side you're standing on, and who's got your back. And I just want to reiterate that very strongly. So
you blocked all that out and only allowed the loving light orbs in your personal world.
Right. And I would say only that which is of the highest light, love, and intention from God is allowed in my space, period. That's just how it's going to be. And I was very fortunate to get amazing photos, have amazing experiences. There were a couple of questionable photos but for the most part, 99.9% of the time, it was very good and loving and very uplifting.
Interesting. Well, I guess that could segue into a little bit of what I sent you in email. I personally took some orb photos from a friend of mine who is dealing with bipolar paranoid schizophrenia, and he was showing signs of what Archbishop James Cloud determined was demonic possession. And I was able to go into his bedroom where I always felt a presence by the window, and he seemed to be tortured in that room. He'd have time displacement and other issues, torment, voices, all in this bedroom space. And I took a very brief photo from a 2006 digital camera, and I got what seemed to be some sort of alien orb or some sort of darker orb. And I emailed these over to Virginia because, of course, I wanted her to comment on those. So what do you think, Virginia?
Well, in looking at the photo, I only saw one. The photo was actually looked like it was a little bit of a double exposure.
It was a little blurry.
A little blurred. So the object I was looking at was on the curtain in the back. Is that the one we're talking about?
Correct.
Okay. And it looks like a face to me. I didn't see any other orbs, just probably because of the nature of the photograph in there.
Yeah, that was really the one that we were wondering about.
The one you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. And I didn't personally feel anything one way or the other, but what you mentioned in your email to me was a cold spot.
Yes.
And cold spots are very definitely a spirit that's in the room, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. That I can't tell you. But if your friend is having a really hard time, he should consider moving or having that space cleaned or cleared. And you certainly can be possessed demonically. There was a story in the Bible about this one man who was possessed by demons, and the villagers came to ask Jesus to help him. And Jesus came and cast out the demons into a little herd of pigs that were right there, and then sent the pigs in the water to be drowned, and the demons were gone. And the man was totally fine. It was and that news spread everywhere of Jesus' ability to do that. But certainly we have good, the demons, we have angels, we have good souls, we have bad souls, we have all sorts of stuff. And I'm very sorry to hear your friend is suffering from that.
It's fine. It's a terrible situation, but that orb did just kind of spook me. And I had a phone conversation with a woman named Hope Mead, who helped to produce a documentary called Orbs, The Veil is Lifting. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Yes. Yes.
And she said that she had a similar situation where there was a person that was demonically possessed, supposedly, and they captured some photos in that person's space that seemed to show demonic faces in orbs. And she said she was going to include that in the documentary, but then decided at the last second to cut it because they wanted to just maintain the loving presence of orbs and what that meant and all the good things, and didn't want to put any energy into that. So she did have a similar experience. I thought that was interesting.
It is really interesting. And that's the same thing I struggled with in writing my books and website and talking about orbs, is how much do you include or how much do you edit? Right. And I really wanted people to have a good experience, but I also encourage them to be very specific about what they want around them.
And I think that the Creator, God, responds when you ask for protection, when you ask for shielding, for white light to come and shield you. You ask Jesus to be there with you to protect you from these entities. 100% of the time it works. Would you say that's correct?
I would say absolutely. And I think, there's a reason why they talk about this type of thing in the Bible, is to, basically pick your side and stick with it, and to not dabble in all of that, just because you do open up the energy to receive things that might not be that much fun.
Yeah. And stuff that,
I'm just saying, that can scare the heck out of you.
Right. And you don't really need to deal with, because really at this stage in human development, we really need to be focusing on personal growth, personal development and integrating this spiritual knowledge, not really focusing on anything negative that could bring us down.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And a lot of people, I think everybody is searching. They don't know what they're searching for. Some of us have, grown up in religion and we rebelled because it was too confining and too restrictive, and we just didn't understand it. It didn't make it fun and exciting. I mean, when I think of Jesus, I'm like, the man was incredible. Not only was he incredible, he was unconditionally loving and non-judgmental.
Right.
And that was something that I had to struggle with all my life, knowing that, but to be led through all of these other religions, Catholic girls' boarding school and yada yada, where your whole idea of what we know when we come from the other side, that love and that light and that amazing energy, to be skewed here on earth. And so a lot of us, I think, become lost, and we find ourselves dabbling in the occult and all sorts, Satanism and all sorts of different things, because we're searching. We're trying to find our way home.
Yes.
And I think that the more that we can do as individuals to, kind of clear the path and help others find their way home, but to the right home, to our rightful place, which to me personally is God and
Yes.
Jesus and heaven, and that loving energy is where I know I came from, and I want to get back there. So I hope that I can become a loving, kind, compassionate person.
You are.
And help others on their journey.
I don't think you are becoming. You're there. You're 100% there. It's obvious in your books, your energy, your attitude. You're there, and you're doing the work, which is being in a leadership role and emitting that frequency of Christ, the Christ consciousness. Some people say the Christ consciousness, but it's really just love. You're emitting love. Mm-hmm. And we did talk to Jacqueline Small last episode about the Gnostic Jesus and the esoteric meanings and some of the hidden books of the Bible that were removed. And that's fascinating as well. The whole other side of the Jesus story.
I mean, when you want to get into somebody who was the true magician that could bring people back to life and heal and part the oceans, for goodness sakes, I mean, wow, is all I can say. I would really like to be able to do that.
Well, you can, as what Jesus says, right? Jesus. So, but I do, I love talking about this, but I do want to get back to Orbs a little bit. So you think in your book that they could also be made out of subtle energy or plasma. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, there's two theories. The subtle energy is the chi, the prana, the life force, the bio force, that type of energy. And then they also, the Orb project with Klaus Heinemann and Michal Ledwith, they talked about the plasma energy. And we honestly don't know. We know it's some sort of a light energy. I have stories of people touching them. I've touched it, and I wasn't able to feel hot, cold, indifferent. All I know, it was a light energy that's there. So I don't think we really know one way or the other if it's plasma or subtle energy, and it could very well be a combination of both of those. Now, did you read the story of the one that showed up in the middle of the night on my chest?
Yes, I did. And there is photos of that, isn't there?
No photos of that one, but that was really interesting. I was having a very bad dream. In fact, I was having a dream where I was standing in front of Satan, and it was literally terrifying. I know who was on my backside, who had my backside, but suddenly I was pulled out of that dream and awakened, and sitting on my chest was an orb about the size of a volleyball. And I was like, wow, am I really seeing this? Is it really here? And I, would check the ambient light from the keypad on my alarm in my bedroom and look back to this. And yes, there was absolutely an orb sitting on my chest. But as my chest rose and fell from my breath, the sheets didn't go, kind of passed through it. It didn't move it. And eventually I ran my hand down it like you would be squishing a balloon from the top, like a karate chopping. And my hand passed right through it. And I did that twice, and I go, wow, I mean, this is amazing. It had this rim around it and kind of clear inside. I felt it was more of a masculine energy than a feminine energy, and that it was watching me and that it had pulled me from that dream for my own benefit. And after a few, I don't know, probably a minute and a half of looking at it, I just fell back asleep. Who does that? Who would fall asleep with an orb on their chest? Seriously, I was like, the next morning, did I really just fall back to sleep? And I realized it put me to sleep.
Right.
So my experience with that particular orb, I could not feel anything. There were, I wanted to call them like fish, but there weren't fish inside. It looked like dimmed neon colored Play-Doh worms or something swimming inside of it. It was definitely living, but not in my dimension. And I could see it, but it wasn't in my third dimension. So I've seen balls of light that are super bright, and you think that if you would touch them, they would be hot or, burning hot, but there's no temperature to them. So that leads me to believe that maybe it's not a plasma, subtype of plasma, but it is a subtle energy that we're seeing.
Interesting. And that also brings the point up that some people can see them without cameras. They can visually see them like you did earlier in your life. And then here in this nightmare scenario, you can see them without cameras. It's not just this camera-based phenomena.
Right. And I had a lot of, in putting my book together, I had a lot of emails from parents talking about their children who could see these colored balls of light floating around. And I think what is the norm, kids see them, so they assume that adults see them, and some will say things and others will not say anything. And I've known kids that will never say anything, and they'll grow up and they'll still be able to see them. I've only seen them on a few occasions with my eyes. I can generally feel when they come into the room, and that's when I know to pick up my camera and get the photograph. So I can feel the person or the spirit, the soul, something move into the room. But it feels good. It's not a scary something, or I probably wouldn't take the picture.
Right. And children, like you're saying, do have an increased sensitivity to it.
Yes. And Jake, when babies are born, they are fresh from spirit. They are fresh from the face of God. They still have that connection. The veil is open. It has not closed. And we look at infants, well, I say general population looks at infants as if their brain, there's nothing in their brain and they don't know anything, when in fact, they know everything. It's unbelievable. I'm going to digress and tell you a really quick story.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
About my granddaughter. So when my son died, in the 7 years since he had been gone, we had 5 different mediums come to my daughter and I and tell us that my son was going to reincarnate through my daughter. And I thought it was interesting, but I was just going to stand back and watch. And in fact, Kristen's first daughter, Brooklyn, is my son. And it was the most unbelievable experience to watch this circle of life. So she was born and I got to hold her about 12 hours. Well, as they were wheeling her in the bassinet to the room, her eyes were wide open. And I stopped to look at her and she looked at me and I knew this soul. I didn't look at her and go, oh, that's Chris. But there was a familiarity there that, if you've ever run into a stranger and go, yes. I know you. I know you.
Feel that presence.
Yes. And so then about 12 hours later, I finally got to hold her and I'm patting her on my shoulder and telling her how much I love her. And I said, I can't wait to hear your stories from the other side about God and Jesus, the ascended masters. Suddenly, she lifts her head off of my shoulder, leans back, and turns and looks me straight in the eye. Like, you do know I can't talk yet, right? But wow, did you really ask me that question? And I've held babies. I've had 4 of my own children. Babies don't do that. So about 2 weeks later, I was holding her again. I said the same thing. She lifted her head up and turned and looked right at me. Again, the same thing. So as this little girl started to grow, I was just like blown away. So as she started to grow, she was about 9 months, and there's a photo on the wall of my son and daughter in the bathroom, and her mom was carrying her out, and the baby grabbed back in and just stared at the picture for a minute. And my daughter pointed to my son in the picture, babbling. Then she would look at her dad, babbling, and point to the ceiling and look up at the ceiling. Point to my son, blah, 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 dad, blah, blah, blah. She couldn't really talk. She's just babbling at 9 months, and then point back up to the ceiling. And Jeff was completely blown away by this. Like, wow, is she just telling me that she either met Chris up in heaven or she knows Chris? Very unusual for a child to do that.
Yeah.
So then she gets a little bigger. Oh, whenever she would see me, she would say, Mama. And then Kristen goes, no, that's not Mama. That's Grammy. So she would always call me Mama.
Whoa.
And then she's about 2.5 or 3, and she's standing in the closet with her mom, and she's going through her mom's jewelry. She picks up a necklace and says, I want to give this to my mom. Now, Kristen's like, well, I'm your mom, but she didn't say anything. And then Brooklyn corrected herself. She said, Kristen said, who's your mom? And she said, well, Grammy was my mom before you were my mom.
Whoa.
So now we're like, okay, wow, right? So Chris, before my son died, and Logan was 5 years old when he passed away. And by the time Brooklyn saw Logan is grown up now. He's probably about 12 or 15 maybe. And Logan comes walking into the bedroom, and Brooklyn just kind of puts her hands on her hips and cocks her head and looks at him and said, Logan's a big boy now. Now, what 3-year-old's going to say that? It just didn't make sense. And then the whole week while Logan was there, she kept saying, the baby kept saying, Logan's my daddy. Well, I'm thinking she was trying to say I was Logan's daddy. It's just really, really interesting.
Oh my God. Well, it sounds like you have your own story, like that story from India. That's because the reincarnation happened in your own family.
Exactly. So there's one more experience that I want to share with you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Go ahead.
I go ahead and take them, she and her brother, to the park. And I'm up in Ketchum, Idaho, and I lived there when Chris was alive and his sister, Kristen. And Chris had gone to elementary school at this park down from my house. And Brooklyn had never been there with her brother. She'd just never been there. So I'm strolling in a little stroller. We get close to the park, and suddenly Brooklyn goes, Grammy, I used to play here with my friend Johnny. Oh. And I'm like, what did you just say? Chris's best friend was Johnny Wilkins.
Whoa.
Brooklyn has no friends named Johnny. There's nobody in the family named Johnny. It's just unbelievable. And I guess the point I'm trying to make to your listeners, there is so much more that we can't even comprehend. We just really can't. And my wish through all of my experiences was to let people know that there is so much more, that we don't die, that our loved ones that are gone are just gone. They've stepped out of their physical body, and they're still there. And hopefully they're in a better place. We all want that.
I think so.
Yeah, we do.
But
it's just amazing. Life's just amazing. It just blows me away all the time.
But that's part of the purpose of the Orbs, is to let us know that there is that continuation. There are those beings on the other side, especially when I think about the photo in your book of the Native American in the Redwood Grove. And it's so
Oh, wasn't that spectacular?
that was mind blowing. I used to live in southern Humboldt County in the Redwoods, and I might have even been to that where that picture was taken. And to see such a distinctly Native American face in the orb, I urge everyone to go check this book out. You know, there's even a Kindle version, and you can see this face, this clear Native American in a redwood grove. It's in the orb. You can see the face of clearly a Native American. It's mind blowing. But there are some sort of biochemical foundation which potentially could trigger the interaction with orbs. And I want to talk to you about this more because you had a whole chapter in your book. I wasn't expecting this, to be completely honest. I was not expecting a whole chapter on DMT and how DMT plays a vital role in experiencing orbs and also healing through these spiritually transformative experiences. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Well, my research led me to DMT and the vibrations that the participants talked about, because during my grief journey, I was either deep in grief or I was feeling this rush of energy through me, like a vibration, and like I was floating in champagne, but there's a vibration. You know, if you've ever been in an airplane on the end of the runway and the pilot revs the engines up before he releases the brakes, and you feel that shot, that's the feeling, this like you're going to get shot out into the universe. And I kept feeling this, and I wondered, you know, when we talk about the pineal gland and how this little pine cone shaped gland could possibly be the center or the seat of our soul and our ability to connect with God and where we have come from. And as I was researching the DMT and reading about the participants' experiences through this, I go, wow, that sounds a lot like mine. But what I also realized, there were near-death, I wondered about the near-death experience. So could my experience just have kind of revved up the booster rockets? But in order to have a near-death experience, that's when they really get shot out in the universe. And that this DMT is something that through, you know, whether you do meditation or whether you visualize or whether you raise your vibration, and somehow it allows us to connect with the divine. And that's what I just thought that was so interesting, because so many near-death experiencers have these descriptions of like being shot out and the vibrations and different things. So it was an interesting research idea that I tried to expand on that chapter.
It seemed to correlate with everything that you were talking about. And you said that DMT is the biological foundation of spiritually transformative experiences, but you talked about them always in a very natural sense, accessing them through meditation or in sadder situations through extreme grief or stress. But have you ever tried the synthetic version, whether smoking it or the other methods that are out there? Because it is out there to try if it's, you know, it is available in the world.
You know, I think I smoked a half a joint one time in my life, and it just didn't work for me. It just, right. I'm like, was so hungry. I'm like, this is not working. So the same thing with alcohol. I can have one glass of wine, two, and I'm sound asleep. So I found I was able to have experiences on my own without any help. And it was mostly when I focused my mind on doing so, in choosing that, whether you make a vision board or whatever it is. If I want that experience to happen, I could actually create it without any outside influence. But have you had the opportunity to try that?
Yes, I have probably dozens of times in my life. I've tried the NN-DMT and also the 5-MAO DMT, which comes from the Colorado river toad, the Sonoran desert frog. Are you aware of that?
No.
So essentially, there's a frog called the Sonoran desert toad, and it has glands on them. They're big fat, pussy glands. They look like blisters. And inside those blisters are pure liquid DMT. And people, it's mind blowing. And people for thousands of years, of course, native people, but then it kind of became kind of a commercialized thing. Not really commercialized, but just kind of a mainstream thing to get these frogs, and you milk the glands onto like a piece of glass or some piece of metal. And I don't recommend doing this, people. This is just, what people do. I'm just informing Virginia. And they let that liquid dry. And then once it's dry, you can scrape it off the glass and then smoke that. And I've tried that, and that was an incredible experience. I had a simulated near-death experience where, I had the rocket out of my body. I'm interacting with, you don't really remember a lot of it when it's that intense, but you're interacting with angels. And what I do remember is them sending me back in that experience. They know it's not your time. That's all I really remember. And my experiences with NN-DMT, which is not the kind that comes from the toad, is completely different. And that's where I've had the most experiences because it's synthesized, so it's more readily available. And those experiences are the alien landscapes, the tapestry reality, the presence of the divine and presence of the angels, and just seeing these kind of like gnome-like beings, and it's very, very surreal. And that's something completely different. And that's kind of my experience with the synthetic form of DMT and the natural form, but just the external DMT. Did those experiences where you were seeing the like ETs or the gnomes or what have you, was that like a lucid dream experience, or was it different? Radically different, because in lucid dream experiences I've had, it's almost like real, but in a surreal sense. These were almost like if you could visualize a form coming out of patterns and then taking on the outline of a being and then coming into form as a more detailed being, but still part of the tapestry, still made out of the jewels, if that makes sense. It's really hard to describe for anyone. It's very hard to put into words. Well, that's interesting. Is it something similar? I'm sure you saw those pictures of the plasma veils or the subtle energy veils where there's mist and it's forming into a face or a shape or something that I have in my book. Kind of, yes. Would it be similar to that? Similar, but more defined. Okay. But that's very interesting. Yeah, I'll send you some visionary artwork, actually, that has depictions of some of these things in a way that's very accurate. And believe it or not, people actually take DMT and make music that's supposed to synthesize with the DMT dimension. It's really interesting. There's an artist by the name of Tipper. His full name is David Tipper, Tipper, and all of his music is, in a sense, designed around the DMT experience. It's amazing. I'll look that up. Yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. That's very interesting. Well, let me segue really quickly, if you don't mind. Yeah, no, go ahead. There is a doctor, orthopedic surgeon from New York, I believe, and he had a near-death experience. Was in a phone booth, struck by lightning, dead. He stepped up out of his body, and as he began to walk away from his body, he noticed his own, thinking it was his body, changing. He became a 3-foot ball of light, a big orb. And then there happened to be a nurse on site that brought him back to life, and he was sucked back into his body. But when he came back, he had an insatiable appetite to learn how to play classical piano. Oh, and yes. He learned how to play it, and there was a song that would play over and over in his head. And if he didn't practice that day, it would just relentlessly torture him with this song. So when he was up talking, we were at a conference, I took a few orb pictures. And at the moment he was telling the audience that he was relentlessly pestered by this song in his head, that there was an orb attached to his head. Oh, I'm just
I'm just wondering with this DMT, there's got to be some sort of crossover or blending of experiences. Maybe the DMT really takes you to one end, to the far left, and orbs are somewhere in the middle, and there's a far right type of experience or something.
Well, it seems like what you talked about in your book, which is really amazing, which is actually working to stimulate the DMT in your brain naturally. Perhaps that's a different experience, though there is similarities to the external DMT. But yeah, that natural brain-based DMT allows for those beings to come in a different way. It allows connections to be made, some sort of like a meeting point of energies to transmit that. I'm not sure.
What I discovered when I would raise my vibration, I have a song that I put on it. It's called Ain't No Mountain High Enough. It's the Tammy Terrell one. And the moment that starts, I just feel a rush in my body, and it just lifts me up. And I noticed that when I listen to that song and I feel that lifting power, that champagne feeling, that excitement.
Yeah, swimming in champagne.
Body, right. That's when I notice I begin to touch the other side more. I would have more spiritual events happen, more synchronicities, more almost as if my conscious awareness was connecting to the soul consciousness of others at that same vibration or something. But it's really interesting because in my books, I tell people to, in order to raise your vibration, do something, put on some music that gets you up and moving, that you get really excited about it. You get in the moment. And that's a great way to be able to lift and raise your vibration in order to begin to have these spiritual experiences. So you've chosen a chemical route, and there's tons of other routes.
Yes.
I mean, right, that whoever's comfortable with it can choose their own route to get there.
Well, there's also the big trend of ayahuasca, which is DMT in natural liquid form.
You're braver than I am. Have you tried that?
No, that I'm going to be completely upfront and tell you that I did not try that. To do it authentically, you have to go to a place like Peru and interact with a shaman. And I just haven't had a period in my life to go do something like that.
Have you ever been on a vision quest?
I mean, I've had psychedelic
drumming and that type of thing.
Not with traditional natives, no.
Mm-hmm. I went on a vision quest, and there were 16 of us, and we built this this kind of a teepee tent type of thing that we all fit inside of. And you bring in these hot rocks, and everybody's got an instrument, and you have 16 people who are not an orchestra. We're just individuals that most of us don't even play an instrument. There was something that would go on in there with the collective, that as they started playing, there was music coming out of there that you couldn't have taken those people with an instructor and said, you're going to play this, 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 and this, and at this beat and at this time, and it's going to come out professionally sounding. It was the most incredible thing I have ever experienced. I mean, I don't even have words for that. I wish we had it recorded. I think there's so many amazing things out there, Jake, and I just want to thank you for delving into all of this for everybody, all of these different little niches of information and spiritual awareness that's so helpful and enjoyable, and a great place to learn more of what's available to us.
Well, I'm trying to just create this platform to bring all of these different schools of thought together so we can really manifest a new earth, a heaven on earth scenario. I feel like with people educating themselves and also just learning more, personal development, just growing as humans, we can figure out the pathways to unite and really make Earth the best possible place it can be, where all of us are living together in love with each other, with everything we need, and without conflict. And I feel like and also though, I do want to point out that I would like to interject humor into it, because people talk about these divine experiences, and it's always very serious, but I'd also like to point out that the divine experience can be fun and funny. You know?
Okay, so I might have a little funny story to share for you. It
Sure.
wasn't funny at the time. So I'm awakened at 3:00 in the morning one evening, and I have a hard time going to sleep anyway. So I was a little irritated that whoever they were waking me up. And I felt this pressure to go outside at 3:00 in the morning and take orb photos. And I'm like, seriously, I do not want to get out of my warm bed and do this. So I argued with him for about 15 minutes, and I finally got my coat on, went outside, took about 30 or 40 photos, and then fine, I'm done. And I went back inside, and I'm flipping through the photos, deleting them. Suddenly I see, coming up from the backside of my swimming pool jacuzzi, a red orb with a plasma shield around it. And the first thing I thought of was the Starship Enterprise. I'm like, are you kidding? You will not find a picture like this anywhere on the internet. I have never seen one like this. And in another photo, I have it coming head on towards me, the red orb with this white, like the Starship Enterprise has that, it's just the big round front on it. And then it goes
with
back
the light
to the
circle. Yes.
Right. It was just, I was so excited. And I'm like, I got to tell somebody, I'm like, I don't know anybody well enough to call them at 3:00 in the morning and tell them I've taken an orb picture that looks like the Starship Enterprise.
Was that one in your book? I don't remember.
It is. Yes, it is.
Okay.
It should be in my book.
Okay, I kind of remember that. And there were so many amazing pictures. And actually, one thing about your book that I thought was so astounding was that by the end of it, you've read over 100 different people's stories, I think, in different capacities, and what they've shared, in the various chapters. There's so many personal accounts, so many personal stories that validate the orb experience and also the spiritual experiences that come with it. I felt like by the end of it that I hung out with like 100 different people. It was pretty amazing.
Well, it's amazing. There's so much information out there. And I was so blessed this entire time I was researching and writing my books that I would get to a part in a chapter and I needed a specific picture. And all I had to do was look towards the ceiling and say, God, I really need a picture that looks like thus and so for this chapter right here. The next day it would be in my inbox from somebody on the other side of the world. I am not joking. I'm not joking. Or I would get a phone call. I would get a phone call from family, and I would have to stop writing, leave the house, get on a plane, go do whatever I needed to do. And in the interim between that trip and coming back, I would get the exact story or meet a person whose exact story needed to go in that exact spot in the book. It was unbelievable. It happened all the time. I was truly blessed. And there were thousands of people from around the world that emailed me stories or called me or photos. And they were also generous to let me borrow their photos and put them in the book in order to move this whole orb phenomenon along. Jake, one thing I don't want to miss talking about in our interview is the last part of the book where we see these photos of these torsion vortices.
Yes, the vortexes. That was amazing.
Unbelievable. So, with photography nowadays and Adobe Photoshop and all the rest of it, CGI, you can make anything look like anything.
Yeah.
But so I was seeing these photos coming in from people, and they would say, I was really dizzy at the time taking this. I don't know what was going on. But most of the picture is correct, but there'll be a swirling vortex in the middle of it. Well, when I began to read about a lot of the NDEers would talk about going through this tunnel, this swirling vortex. The description matched with what I was visually seeing in a lot of these photos that people were sharing. So it's probably been 30 years by now. I ran into a photographer in Ketchum, Idaho, where I lived, and he had spread his father's ashes in the Sierra Mountains. And as he did that, he laid his dad's walking stick up against a rock, spread the ashes, and picked up his camera to take a picture. Now, this person is a professional photographer. He'd taken 2,000 pictures on the West Coast. He'd come and spread his dad's ashes and went home to develop the film. So this was in the days before digital cameras.
Okay.
And as he's going through all of these pictures, everything's great. And he comes to this one picture where he's got the picture of the rock and the trees and the cane. This next picture, there's this swirling vortex. And then the succeeding photo, it's back to normal. And he thought, what the heck did I do? Did I move the camera or whatever? Tosses it in the trash can, pulls it out a day later, keeps it. And over the years, he had just kept it. People would say, oh, that's spiritual, or no, you really screwed up. And it was, something you did in taking the photo. and he just didn't know. So I was lucky enough to have him share that photo with me. And I looked at it and it just stuck with me. It just stuck in the back of my head. And 20 years had passed. And a friend of mine had told me a story about when they adopted this little girl, infant. He was laying on the bed with the infant, staring at the ceiling. And suddenly the ceiling started to swirl like a vortex. And he watched something come down through the ceiling and go into his baby. And I'm like, and he goes, I don't know, was that her soul? I don't even know what that was. It was just the weirdest thing. So those two stories stuck in my mind. Then fast forward 20 years, and now I'm seeing these vortex pictures from these orb photographers going, I've seen this before. Where did I see it? Well, that's when I got Jack Williams' photo, and that's one of the first photos in there. And that's from a 35 millimeter camera.
Right, I remember that one.
Right. And then you start seeing the other photos, and then you add with that the near-death experiencers who describe this vortex and this tunnel. And I'm wondering, are we not seeing the highway to heaven, the tunnel through which our souls pass to go to the other realm? It just kind of blew my mind, and I'm just like, wow.
It is pretty amazing.
Yes.
Well, there is this evidence there, and it is a really powerful and profound thought to think that we survive after death, and then what comes with that. I like to say when people die that we're graduating. I'd like to just get rid of the word dying and death and just change it to graduating, because that's really what's going on. You learned what you learned from your experience as that person in this life, and then you're moving on to your next phase, and then probably your next life to learn more things. And you leave this dimension through these vortices, through these tunnels, and perhaps we become this orb as we die. That is the non-corporeal version of us, as these orbs, these energy beings. I think that that's really what's going on.
There are some amazing stories, and I think I can't remember if they're in my Orb book or the Cracking the Grief Code, because there's a mixture in both of them, where one NDE, there's a lot of them that actually talk about becoming orbs. And one person in particular said he was with Jesus, and Jesus showed him this platter, this brilliant, luminescent, multicolored platter. And suddenly it broke into all these little pieces. And he realized, and then he watched it all go back together. And he realized that we are all those little pieces. That's why they talk about all of us being one. And it's amazing. The stories that I've found that have put together the succession through both books, actually, and weaving it together, and it's like a giant puzzle. But I really feel that I was blessed with these stories to show people the circle of life. It starts here, but it ends up there, and there's just so many parts to it. But we truly don't die. We just step out of our body like we step out of a car, and hopefully with our consciousness and our time on earth, that we've learned some of the lessons we need to. And I've learned through near-death experiencers, there is a heaven and there is a hell, and there's different dimensions in between. And I fully believe that we reincarnate in order to experience both sides of the coin. Both, whether you've been murdered or you're the murderer, the perpetrator or the victim, you're married or you're divorced, or you're burned or you're the person who causes the accident. So through these lifetimes, we come to a place of unconditional love and non-judgment. And who is the epitome of that? That's Jesus.
Yes.
He's showing us what he wants us to be. And we get the opportunity. Here, follow some rules, be a good, loving person. And, maybe you won't have to come back. There is a verse in Revelations that said, I can't paraphrase it, but in essence, it says, if you do what I've asked you to do, I will make you a pillar of my temple and not send you out again. And that to me was talking about reincarnation.
Yes.
So, right? And I'm like, I'm all for it. Okay, once I was 30 and I realized that, wow, I'll have to have a life review, and I really not sure that I want to come back, I better get my act together here. I better apologize, be forgiving, be kind, be loving, try to be the best I could be. And I definitely fall from time to time, but I try to learn from my mistakes. And you know what? In everything, there's a lesson, an opportunity for learning, or there's a forgiveness opportunity.
Right.
And if you look at life that way, it's a lot easier than hitting our head against the wall.
Well, interestingly, in Buddhism, they talk about the people that are the bodhisattvas that get to that point where they are allowed to graduate to the higher dimensions, but they choose to reincarnate because they're waiting for everyone else to get there. They want everyone to get there. And even though they could go through that portal into the higher dimensions, they choose to reincarnate to help humanity get there, because it's not fair unless we're all there. It's not right unless we're all there. That's just what the Buddhists believe. That's really interesting.
I kind of believe that too, as much as I sometimes would like to be on the other side and go, I'm not going back again. I need a rest here. This has been, I feel like I've lived 3 lifetimes. But it's true. We want everybody to go. But
I kind of felt that about you. I was like, no, she's going to come back and help us. Come on.
I met this wonderful woman through my website, and she's a hospice nurse, and she, can see orbs, and she had an amazing near-death experience with God. Unbelievable. So she asked me to write her book, and I wrote it for her, and it took me probably a year and a half because I really wanted to get to know her. And she had written her story, but she has ADD and dyslexia.
Okay.
So there was just a lot. I'm dyslexic, so I could understand her writing. Anyway, I help her write this story. And every time I read it, I cry. When she gets in the presence of God and goes through the lessons he gave her, it just gets me right here, and she's, gosh, I forgot where I was going to segue into something, and I forgot.
No, it's okay.
What it was we were going to segue into.
But I guess this is one of the ways that we heal through these spiritually transformative experiences, right? We can talk about that a little bit more, like orbs, experiencing these orbs, like you talk about in your book, is one way to heal, because you had a grief experience personally. Other people have grieving or grief experiences, and then they get this validation through the orbs, and they're able to heal and then actually change their frequency and become a bigger, energetically bigger, more spiritual person. What other ways do we heal through spiritually transformative experiences?
Well, I would say the most common thing is there's birds and butterflies and dragonflies, and our loved ones like to show up and let us know that they're okay. copper pennies. Someone will see dimes everywhere, and their family member had an affinity for collecting dimes. Whatever it was, my son was a hummingbird, and I had the most amazing experiences with hummingbirds, unusual experiences. And we could never figure out why my son would show up as a hummingbird until my daughter actually looked at his snowboard and there was a giant hummingbird on it. So obviously Chris had an affinity for that. But the spiritually transformative experiences, first of all, when we're in grief, it's really hard to notice anything other than how awful we feel, how traumatized it was, how sad, and rightly so. I mean, we have to honor that grief, and however you go through it, we just honor it and get in there and roll around, and you need to cry and you need to grieve. But during that, you can also put on your spiritual radar, because our loved ones are trying to let us know they're okay. And they do that through the cell phone. The cell phone will ring and you'll pick it up. It'll be their phone number, and it'll seem like someone's on the other end, but you'll just hear crackling or noise. The TV, the normal telephone, the radio, your song that you equated your loved one with, you'll turn it on and you'll be thinking of your loved one, and suddenly that song will start playing. So there's all of these different ways that our loved ones let us know that they're nearby. And once we begin to tune into that, we can begin to shift our perception, our grief journey. The traditional grief journey is you never get over it.
Right.
Your child has died. You just flat don't get over it. But I felt so miserable while I was grieving. I said to myself, there's got to be a better way. Why can't I feel good along with feeling miserable? Or why can't I feel better than miserable? And so I began to reach out, and there's the attitude of gratitude. When my son died, the top story in the news was Natalie Holloway, the beautiful teenager that disappeared in Aruba.
Right.
And as deep in grief that I was and feeling sorry for myself and the whole situation, I chose to feel gratitude that at least I knew where my child was. Natalie's mom didn't know where she was. So I tried to hang on to any little thread that I could to feel gratitude, because gratitude is a different vibration than grief. And you go back and forth, and there's just so many ways to do it, but it's really wanting to do it differently, wanting to feel better, wanting to reach out and touch spirit and connect with your child or your father, mother, brother, whomever it was that you lost. And it's very hard for them to connect with you when you're in such heavy grief, just because it's such a low vibration. So honor your grief, get down there and cry. And then when you stop crying, pick yourself up and say, okay, I want to connect. What can I do to lift myself up a little bit?
And really heal from that.
Right. And it takes a while. We know physiology. Okay. We know physically, couldn't say that word.
It's okay.
I could, but I couldn't. That our brain builds neural pathways when we have a relationship with anybody. And when that relationship is broken, those neural pathways have to reconfigure themselves. And what we get is brain fog and memory loss and sadness and inability to eat and all of these different things we feel with grief. And it takes about 2 years to really kind of have those neural pathways work themselves out. But there's things that we can do in the meantime, honoring how you feel. But also, if you're up for it, know that there's ways to really lift yourself up. Just an attitude of gratitude, a shift in your perception. Dr. Joe Dispenza, do you know of him?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right. He talks about the fight or flight mechanism of 90 seconds. And in those 90 seconds, it's just automatic. But anything after 90 seconds, we are choosing to do. So when I was in grief and laying on the floor and wailing, there was a moment where I became aware of myself crying. And in that moment of awareness, I was able to realize, am I choosing to do this? So I would be fine. I'd be working on my book, and suddenly my thoughts would go to my son, would go to the accident scene. Suddenly I'm feeling bad, and suddenly I'm crying. So part of the healing is being aware of our thoughts. Is that making any sense?
Yes, definitely. And just staying in a higher frequency, because then you're not wrapped up in the grief. And like you said, when you get in those lower frequencies, it blocks those signals that could be coming from the loved ones that have passed on. So
right. That's right.
It's really just taking control of yourself, honoring the grief, like you said, honoring the situation. Of course, you don't want to discount any of it, right? You want to go through your natural grieving process, but at the same time, there is that natural tendency to huddle up, to hide in the grief, to shelter and cut off the outside world in a shell of grief. And by doing that, it disables all these things, including the affirmations that could be coming from the person that died, from the other side.
Exactly. And I found the more effort I made to reach up to spirit, out to God, out to my child, the more encounters I had while grieving, while crying, and I was able to kind of go back and forth. It was like being in a washing machine on, the agitate cycle. I was here, I was there. But I found the more times I connected with spirit, the more excited I got, the more I was able to raise my vibration, which in turn gave me more experiences. And so I went through grief with joy and excitement alongside. They walked hand in hand for a while. And, I have to say it's been 15 years, and there's moments when sometimes I just cry. I cry in regret. I cry just that he's not here to see his son, and his son has missed out on that and different things. But then I'm right back, with my life. So I don't think it ever really leaves you, but I think it's important to know that you can live a life of joy and happiness and smiles, and remember your loved one without having to cry. Remembering the good times and all of that too. So I think that's really important.
Right. And then I liked how you pointed out in your book that when you do get those affirmations and when you have those STEs, it gives you that feeling that the universe is right on track, regardless of what anybody experiences or how difficult the challenges are. You know that everything's moving in the right direction, everything. And it's going towards wherever it's supposed to go. And as spiritual people, we know that everything's made out of love. So the only extrapolation or assumption you can make from that is we're going to the most loving possible place.
That's very true. I didn't tell you what's really set me on this whole quest, aside from my son dying and I was having these experiences with him, is that the day he was born, I knew he was going to die before I did.
Oh,
and I carried
really?
that. Yes.
How did it come to you? Like, was it like just a premonition, like an instant premonition?
It was just this knowing. And, we know in metaphysics, what you think, you think about, you attract. I'm like, I am not thinking about that.
Right.
But it was there, and it was there through his childhood and everything. And when he was about 15 or so, he came to me and said, Mom, I know when and how I'm going to die. And I'm like, what? And I said, tell me. And he wouldn't tell me. Well, a few years later, I got him to tell me that he was going to die when he was 52. And I said, okay, well, I've got some time. But this whole time, I've just holding my breath because I just didn't know when I was going to get that phone call. I knew it was coming. And actually, I have talked to quite a few other mothers who knew that about their child, that their child would die young. So Chris died, and a few months after he died, I remembered that conversation, and he died at age 25, and I saw that 52 switch itself to 25. Well, of course he wasn't going to tell me that was going to happen.
Right.
But the night he died, I'm just a workaholic, so I'm always, up to something. I'm always doing something. And I just thought, I'm just going to get in bed early and take a break, which I don't do very often. And as I'm laying there, I think, oh my God, my child is laying dead in a ditch somewhere, and here I am taking a break. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, where did that come from? Wipe that out. Well, the next morning I get a phone call from my brother that my son was killed. And we end up going to see the accident site, and I saw the photos from the scene. And there my son was laying in a ditch.
Oh my God.
Dead. So I could either go to the loony bin and, be a wreck the rest of my life.
No.
What I did instead was, wait a minute, where did that information come from?
I'm just sorry you had to deal with that as a mom. As a human, it was hard. I'm sorry that you had to deal with that. I just want to say that. Thank
you so much. But out of it, I realized that his death was really a gift. It was a gift of my awakening and my learning to have compassion for others who've lost their family members. Most of us don't. Most of my family, not my immediate family, but, cousins and things, I didn't hear a word from them because people's lives go on. And until you're really touched by that, you don't know. So, he really gave me a blessing of really just being sensitive and compassionate to others who have lost someone. It's a really challenging thing, but we definitely can get through it. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm thankful that you got all those communications that you talked about in your book about all the different times that Chris had contacted you in various ways. I just thought that was so cool, just to give you that affirmation, to let you know, as much as it sucks that you don't have a cell phone to that dimension, he's there, and we're all going to get there eventually.
Well, that's so true. And you know what? There's so many people that say, hey, my loved one contacted me after they died through the cell phone. So,
maybe there is a cell phone to that dimension.
There is cell phone activation. So I kept my son's cell phone, and in the beginning it would ring. Someone would be calling. I'd pick it up. I go, hello, hello. I could hear some very faintly trying to talk to me, and then it would be disconnected.
Oh my God.
So I would redial the number that called me, and I would hear, this number is no longer in service.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So for those of you out there that have lost someone and you want to know if they're okay and they're alive, they are. Put on your spiritual radar, open your eyes, pay attention, because they will try to contact you. And they want to do it because they love you and they want you to be okay. They really do. Chris, I don't hear so much from Chris anymore. I do ask him for parking spaces, and he does pull through on that.
All right. What a good son.
Yeah. But there's just so many amazing things. And also keep a journal for those out there who have lost someone. Keep a journal of your experiences, because after a while you can go back and read them and really see that they were unique, they were little miracles, and that your family member is really truly alive and just on the other side.
Oh yeah. And I think that we do know that. I think that intuitively we do know that, but we've just been programmed, our society has programmed us to believe something different about the post-life experience. We talked about in a previous episode where ancient judo masters, when initiate students would get to the highest degree, they would do a technique to stop their heart, and then they would die and have a near-death experience, and then they had a different technique to restart their heart. So when they came back in and became judo masters, they had no fear of death because they knew what was on the other side. They had just been there.
That is intense.
Tell me about it.
I'm not sure I would choose that, but wow, that is so interesting.
Well, and also we just talked with someone who is very versed in the Gnostic Christianity world, Jacqueline Small, and she talked about a secret second baptism that Jesus did that was talked about, I believe, in the Gospel of Thomas, where he would take certain disciples into a cave and do something similar, where they would die and be reborn. It's really interesting stuff.
Well, that could explain a lot of things. Well, it's listening to the near-death experiencers, the stories they come back with, and there's kind of a vein of of similarity in a lot of their stories about what goes on the other side. And it's just fascinating, because whether they turn into orbs, whether they see friends that were killed in Vietnam and they realize, oh my gosh, they're alive, or they go to hell and realize that the people in hell, all they need to do is cry out to God. That's all they need to do, is reach out to them, but they can't. Nobody can do that for them. That's something that they need to do. But hell is absolutely real. Get on YouTube and look up the preachers that have been to hell. And
I just got to interrupt you there. So you're saying that, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like it's so powerful what you're saying. So you're saying that people that are in hell can get out of hell while they're in hell by crying out to God and asking God for help, and then God will respond to them, but they just don't know how in that position. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And people are in hell because of how they think about themselves. They put themselves in hell. And really, hell is an absence of God. It's the opposite of God. It's the absence of him. So when you
I'm sorry. It's so interesting that you bring that up, because we had a guest where we did an episode about just near-death experiences with an author, M.K. McDaniel, who wrote a book about that. And that is literally 100% what she did. She went to hell and she was there and she cried out to God in her own way. She cried out and she then left hell and went to heaven. It's so fascinating that you're saying the exact same thing.
I think the whole process is fascinating, and the learning process, the fact that we come from heaven, we get to come down here on earth. So the heavenly domain is run by God, but the earthly domain is run by the fallen angel, and everything he does in it is to distract you and trying to break your relationship with God. I mean, it's just amazing. So even if you're atheist, actually, there have been a lot of atheist near-death experiencers that come back and realize that God is real.
Yes.
And that whole thing is real. So I just try to tell my friends, like, you don't have to go to church, if that's where you're not comfortable with. If you were brought up with religion and it was, just
hard,
strangling and hard, and you just don't like it, consider just talking to God, you and God.
Yes.
All he wants is a relationship with you. You can, when you're driving around and you're just appreciating, like I get up in the morning and I'm having blueberries. I'm like, God, that was such a fantastic idea that you made blueberries. Or I love these trees that you made, or the flowers. I have a conversation with him all day long. Doesn't mean that I have to be labeled as religious, but he loves all of his children and he wants them all back. And that's what I've noticed in the near-death experiences when they talk about all of these orbs, the platter that Jesus showed that one person, right, breaking into little pieces and coming back together. We're all one and we're all walking each other home. Sometimes we need to remind our neighbor where our home is and how to get there. Yes. So many of us are lost, right? And I just invite the listener to just consider, if you don't chat with our Father, just chat with them. Even if you don't know where to start, just say, I really like this, what you made down here.
Yeah, open the pathways. Open the pathways.
Exactly. And grow that relationship however you want to do it. Go to a mountaintop can be your church. Grow that relationship, especially now with everything that's going on. We know there's a war between principalities. This is a spiritual war of the utmost urgency at this point in time on earth.
Yes, and this is the time for all of us to be leaders, to raise our vibrations, to battle these negative frequencies that want to pull us into this hellish earth, this timeline of density and negativity, but we can rise above that, and we can manifest an earth that I guess is, you could say, outside of the control of the fallen angels or the fallen angel Lucifer, whoever is controlling this dimension. We can get to a point where we rise above that, but are still in the earthly plane. We can have that experience. I think that's what they talk about at the end of Revelations. After everything's said and done, We're in a new earth, a new world.
We're in exactly what you were describing earlier, where everybody loves each other and cares about each other, and there's no fear and darkness and pain. He's already described that that's exactly what's going to happen. So I want to make sure I'm on that train.
Me too.
And that I want everybody else that I know to be on that train. Come on, everybody, let's jump on that, because we know how it ends. We know how it ends. We're just in the middle of the growing pains and stuff right now. But fear is the worst. Fear takes us far from that connection to our Father. Yes. And that's how Lucifer, I used to, when people would talk about Satan or Lucifer and God, I'm like, roll my eyes, like, oh, seriously, really? But they've proven that Jesus was real. And there are so many near-death experiences that talk about, I met Jesus, I've seen God, I've done this and that.
Yeah, across religions. It's not just Christians.
Across religions.
I think that's so profound. Atheists, New Age people, across religions, they all interact with Jesus. I think that's so profound. That's why I'm so attracted to Jesus myself.
Yeah, I mean, and just I hope when I get there, he looks at me and says, well done. But
oh, yeah, you got this. No, you already got that. You're there.
He's going to look at me and shake his head and go, seriously? Come on.
Actually, he's going to go, I think it's going to be like, you know what? Time to get back to work. I'll see you when you come back next time.
No, don't send me back. I got to go back. No.
The work is not done.
No, oh my gosh.
We have to get to heaven on earth. We have to get to that conflict-free scenario. And there's only one way to get there, and that's by doing it. And it's going to take the enlightened souls. It's going to take the old souls coming back time and time again, begrudgingly, until we're there.
You know what, Jake? I just remembered what I forgot when I was bringing up my friend.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, because of what you just said. I know she and I knew each other on the other side. And I can remember being in a classroom and they said, okay, who wants to go down for this lesson? And she raised her hand and pointed at me. She's going too. I just knew it. Erica, we're like twin souls. And I just knew she raised her hand and pulled mine up too for this mission down here this lifetime. And I'm like, seriously. And in fact, she's had the near-death experience, and she regularly goes to God, what does she call it? It's not God school, but she's regularly back out of her body, up in heaven at the school in like the big cathedrals where they have all the learning institute. And she'd call me on the phone and tell me about that night of when she was back up there. And I go, gosh, I wish I could do it. She goes, you were there too. You just don't remember it. So there's just so many amazing things out there, and God bless you for doing this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you, Virginia. I mean,
all of these amazing things.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we are kind of at the ending point. I do want to have you back. You have to come back. Like this went by like a breeze. We have to have you back at some point to do this again. But before you go, I do want to tell people where to find you. You can be found at the orbwhisperer.com. And of course, virginiahummel.com. I'm going to spell that out for you. It's like the state Virginia, Virginia, and that's Hummel, Hummel, virginiahummel.com. And she has 2 amazing books, Orbs and the Afterlife, and Cracking the Grief Code, that are available. And is there anything, Virginia, that you want to tell our audience? We're over 100 countries now. Is there anything that you want to tell our audience to inspire them, a message you want to leave them with? Yes.
And that would be, you are the light. The light of God is in you. That light just wants to shine bright. And when you acknowledge your connection to the divine, you're letting that light shine. And that's what's going to help raise our planet's vibration, our awareness, and help take all of those beautiful souls back to heaven where they belong. So I would say, just let your light shine. Let that goodness and that light come out of you.
Yes. Be love. Be love.
Right. Be love and kindness and it's really the ripple effect.
Yes.
That when you do something nice, or you smile at someone, or you hold their door, or you compliment them and uplift them, the ripple effect is they're going to do it to the next person. That's how we can change everything.
Yes. And then when we get there, which it is where we're going, it's going to be an absolutely amazing place. Heaven on earth. But Virginia, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Please hold through the outro music and we'll talk a little bit more. And everyone, we'll see you next week. Don't forget to check out Blue Cobra CBD, Midnight on Earth.